Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the University of Central Florida, Department of Criminal Justice, and I'm making a video here for my Violent Crimes, Violent Criminals graduate course. And this is the first part of Psychopathy and Corporate Crime, a preliminary examination. And much of this comes from the article by Pardue, Robinson, and Arrigo titled Psychopathy and Corporate Crime, a Preliminary Examination, Part 1, published in the Journal of Forensic Psychology Practice, Volume 13, pages 116 to 144. An excellent article. First, the authors on page 119 define corporate crime as wrongdoing committed by corporate officials for the benefit of their corporation and offenses of the corporation itself. So these crimes cause a great deal of damage, but may go unknown for years or may not even be known, and they may not be addressed as strongly as crimes in the street. Basically, you've probably heard the saying, crimes in the suite are more expensive than crimes in the street. So with crimes in the street, you see that they're more visible, and usually there's a pretty immediate harm, and we know that there's an individual or group of offenders, and much of the time they can be identified. And there's a variety of factors that lead to the motivations to commit the crime, and the crime's pretty much intentional. In contrast, in corporate crime, the authors point out that the corporate crimes tend to be invisible, and there may be harm that occurs many years later, so there's a delay in the harm, or it may be indirect for that matter. And there often are multiple offenders. There's often a financial motivation for committing the crime, and often we see harm to many is the outcome. The authors provide examples of corporate wrongdoing. For example, in the area of labor exploitation, they provide some examples of major corporations. Likewise, with insider trading, fraud, and misleading investors, they also provide some well-known examples of corporations who have engaged in criminal activities, and also with fraud, insider trading, and deceptive advertising, leading to the economic problems and collapse we saw back in 2008. There are many corporations that have engaged in corporate crime. Often the criminologist is facing a whole group of PR specialists who are trying to spin the corporate crime. For example, I recently saw an advertisement on television that after committing corporate crime, the organization was such a great organization, they actually made things better, almost as if it was a good thing they committed corporate crime because now things are better. I'm not sure if things are better, and in fact, I'm pretty confident they're not, but it's that spin, and often that's very difficult to fight. As you can tell, I'm not mentioning any corporate names in this particular video to avoid the headache of getting a cease and desist letter from an attorney regarding the labeling of a major corporation as criminal, even though they clearly are. Well, if we look at theoretical explanations of corporate crime, the authors go through several of the major theories that we use to explain crime in the streets and point out that they often fail to adequately understand and address corporate crime. And that's a very important area for our research and obviously for our practice and prevention strategies. But they start off by looking at Gottfried's and Hershey's 1990 self-control theory, which is extremely popular and a very well researched and supported theory when explaining juvenile delinquents or violent crimes and the like. And there the major feature is a lack of self-control that the individual has. So basically, often in early childhood, we see that self-control doesn't adequately develop, and this leads to problems with impulse control and acting out later on in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. They say that's not much assistance in explaining corporate crime. Then they move on to a general strain theory from Agnew's work. People try to reduce strain, and often in the corporations we see that they actually are making a lot of money, but they want to make more. And so this may not help that much as either. Messner and Rosenfeld's institutional anomy theory, an excellent theory explaining all kinds of violent crimes perhaps, but may not have that much application to corporate crime. And then they talk about Robinson and Murphy's contextual anomy strain theory, and they say this could be applied to corporate crime, looking at both legitimate and illegitimate methods to obtain goals. And you see that mix in corporate crime, obviously, but they say we need something more. Of course, social learning theory always is helpful, and we can use that in looking at how people learn how to commit corporate crimes and how they justify it. And then they also believe that that doesn't go far enough, and they say really what we might need to look at is psychopathy. And they say psychopathy may provide those in the corporations that commit these crimes with impressions of normalcy while they are engaging in these harmful practices. So they look at psychopathy. In fact, they look at psychopathy over antisocial personality disorder. And they talk about observations of psychopathy and elite crime. And they talk about those same characteristics that we've addressed before. Think about how they may be used and how they actually may be useful in maximizing gain in corporate settings, albeit while harming others. Irresponsibility, manipulativeness, lack of empathy, lack of guilt or remorse, superficiality, grandiosity, and pretending to be responsible and concerned about the welfare of others. In fact, not too long ago, I was talking to someone on the phone regarding a complaint at a corporation, and they were just being antagonistic, not helpful. What it boiled down to is finally I said, aren't you trained to at least pretend that you care about the customers? And they said, no, we're not. Of course, I had to go, to another person who was actually able to fake like they care and get my problem resolved. Or maybe they did care, I don't know, but right away they were helpful. So, you see that a lot of times, and you have to wonder about that. So in their part one, really what they do is they set the stage for saying that corporate leaders who create crimes in the suites may basically have the characteristics of, some of them may have the characteristics that we find in psychopaths or psychopathy. And that will be the focus on part two, which I'll cover in a different video. So this wraps this up. Thank you.